One, uncreated Creator, Light of light, we praise your holy name. Lord, you are the joy and strength of our lives. You can remove all pain, misery, and strife. Be for our lawmakers a source of truth. May they view pressing issues in the light of your precepts, embracing your wisdom, power, and patience. Lord, give them a passion for compassion and joy as they remember your desire that they live abundantly. Continue to shine in all our hearts so that neither the precipice of unbelief nor the shadow of death separates us from the light of your great love. We pray in your sacred name. Amen.
Will you please join me in the pledge? I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Is reserved. Morning business is closed. Under the previous order, the Senate will proceed to executive session and resume consideration of the following nomination, which the clerk will report.
Nomination, the judiciary, John Thomas Shepard of Arkansas to be United States District Judge for the Western District of Arkansas.
Recognize the senator from Iowa.
Thank you. Want to make some remarks about Iran. I do it in light of the fact that diplomacy ought to be used before war. And I am well aware of hard work of our vice president and other people on his team in Pakistan last week, working almost 24 hours to reach an agreement, and it was not reached. Some reports late last night, early this morning, indicate that maybe Iran is willing to sit down and talk again. So in light of that, and what we know and what we hope happens, I make these remarks. On February the 28th, 2026, the United States began combat operations in Iran. Action taken to protect U.S. Americans by preventing Iran from ever having a nuclear weapon. That's not only to protect the United States, but that weapon could be used any place on this globe, and we don't want that to happen. But the most important thing is the president as commander-in-chief is exercising his responsibilities. The number one responsibility that he has and our nation has to protect the American people. Now, these operations have demonstrated the unmatched strength, precision, and professionalism of the United States military. America is very fortunate to have the strongest military in the world, capable of not only projecting power, but of doing so with discipline, coordination, and a clear sense of mission. I want to express my gratitude and pride in the men and women in uniform who are carrying out this mission, and to let the families of Declan Cody, a young man from West Des Moines, and Major Jeffrey O'Brien, a man from Indianola, Iowa, who both paid the ultimate price to protect us. We think about their families at this time, but it also is a reminder that these men who lost their lives, as well as people who are still fighting, about the courage, skill, and commitment to protecting our nation, reflect the very best of our men and women in uniform. Now, what we've known for a long period of time is that Iran has used their money to finance terrorism around the world. Even in the United States, it's been demonstrated by 3 or 4 actions since the war happened. And they're the number one supporter of terrorism financially, and that they use their missiles to blackmail that part of the globe. But what we've learned is they have more capability than just affecting blackmail in the Middle East, because we've learned that they have longer range missiles that could reach Berlin, Paris, and London. And when is the next step that those missiles could reach the United States? So under the leadership of President Trump, the United States is taking decisive action to provide safety and certainty for the American people. More than 85% of Iran's defense industrial base has been destroyed. 150 warships have been destroyed, and 70% of Iran's facilities and ground control stations have been destroyed or degraded. In total, over 13,000 targets have been struck, and over 1,000 attack drones and 700 ballistic missiles have been destroyed. Preventing war through diplomacy is very important, but when diplomacy doesn't work, we've seen in this instance, in total, over 13,000 targets have been struck, and over 1,000 attack drones and 700 ballistic missiles have been intercepted. Preventing Iran from ever acquiring a nuclear weapon isn't just a policy objective, it's a national security priority. I'm encouraged that military operations have been successful in advancing this goal, and that Iran has now agreed to a ceasefire as this administration continues to negotiate a broader peace agreement. This success sends a clear signal. The United States will act when its security is at stake, and we will do so with strength and with resolve. The progress made so far underscores both the capability of our military and the importance of sustained leadership by President Trump as our commander-in-chief. I stand firmly behind our service members and remain committed to ensure that Iran never poses a nuclear threat to the United States. I yield and suggest the absence of a quorum.
The clerk will call the roll, please.
Ms. Elsa Brooks.
Democrats here in the Senate been voted which way.
Mr. President, So prior to Senator Thune speaking, I just want to point out, as always, as we all know, Iran cannot get a nuclear weapon. Also, for everybody that's watching in the chat, good morning to each and every last one of you. Please make sure that you drop down and put a 1 in the chat. This is a huge point of a contention for a lot of world leaders, especially for American civilians, that when it comes down to Iran chanting death to America for the past, I don't know how many years, this is a very important point of contention. A lot of people feel like Iran does not need or should have the capability to develop or enrich nuclear material or nuclear weapons. So with that being said, let's continue.
Majority Leader.
Mr. President, I ask unanimous consent the quorum call be dispensed with.
Without objection.
Mr. President, we spent the weeks before Easter debating the Save America Act here in the Senate. And since the debate began, we've seen Democrats contort themselves every which way to justify opposing the common sense policies in this bill. On no issue is that more evident than voter ID. Mr. President, polls show that 80% of Americans support voter ID. Majorities of Americans in both parties support this common sense requirement. But among Democrats here in the Senate, it's a different story. Sure, Democrats have spent the last few weeks claiming that they support voter ID. But when it came time to vote on a reasonable, standalone voter ID proposal, every Democrat opposed it. That's right, Mr. President. Senate Democrats have been trying to rebrand themselves as supporters of voter ID. But when Republicans offered a straightforward voter ID proposal, every single Democrat in the Senate voted against it. Mr. President, I want to be clear about what Republicans put forward and what Democrats opposed. Senator Husted, someone who knows quite a bit about administering elections as the former two-term chief election official in the state of Ohio, offered a very simple voter ID amendment. The only thing it did requires a photo ID at the polls. A driver's license, tribal ID, military ID, veteran ID, passport, the types of IDs that are sitting in wallets right now and that the American people use on a regular basis. That's it. Supporting this amendment would not have obliged Democrats to support the underlying Save America Act. Democrats would have been free to vote for voter ID and then vote against the other common sense policies in the Save America Act. But Democrats couldn't bring themselves to vote even for standalone voter ID legislation. And it turns out that when Democrats say they support voter ID, they don't mean actual IDs. Mr. President, when Republicans and Americans, I would argue, talk about ID, we all mean the same thing. Something with a picture, an expiration date, something issued by a government. And to hear Democrats talk in the lead up to the voter ID vote, you'd have thought that's exactly what they were talking about too. The senior senator from New Jersey went on CNN and said, and I quote, "We all want people who go to vote to show a valid ID," end quote. The Democrat whip said, and I quote again, "I'm not opposed to that. They ask you for an ID at the airport, don't they? That's reasonable," end quote. Yes, it is reasonable. The junior Democrat from New York said this, and again I quote, "The ideas that we have in our wallets should be good enough to vote," end quote. Well, Mr. President, that is exactly what we offered. Licenses, state ID cards, tribal IDs were all acceptable forms of ID in our proposal. The same kinds of ID that we have in our wallets right now. Mr. President, multiple Democrat senators even acknowledge that their own states have voter ID requirements and that they work. The junior senator from Georgia came to the floor and said this, and I quote again, "I think you should have to prove that you are who you say you are before you vote. I support voter ID. We have voter ID laws in my state. You should have to prove that you are who you say you are before you vote." End quote. I couldn't have said it better myself. And the Democrat leader said, and I quote, "Our objection as Democrats is not to a photo ID," end quote. Except as Democrats' recent vote demonstrates, that's not actually true. Before the vote, the Democrat leader spoke on the floor and made it clear that when he says he supports voter ID, he means that he supports voter ID as long as the ID requirements in question are essentially meaningless. And he's not the only one. To quote a recent news story, the junior senator from Colorado said, and I quote, "He supports voter ID, but signaled he will vote no when informed that the bill does not allow voters to use a utility bill to prove identity," end quote. He voted no because you can't show a utility bill as a form of ID. Mr. President, you can't make this stuff up. The senator from Colorado used to own a brewery in Denver. And I have to wonder whether you could show a utility bill to buy a beer there. I doubt it. But this is what Democrats think is good enough for our elections. The Democrat leader has said that voter ID requirements need to be, quote, inclusive and, quote, flexible. And he referenced a bill Democrats put forward a few years ago that included the sort of ID requirements that he says Democrats support. Well, let me read a few of the so-called IDs that bill would have found acceptable for voters. A debit card, a utility bill, an expired fishing license, any document containing an individual's name, just their name, from any government. And of course, a photocopy of any of those would have been fine too. If this ID list were any more inclusive, Mr. President, my Jones County High School basketball jersey would have counted. Mr. President, in any other circumstance, requiring an ID means requiring an actual ID. You can't board a plane by showing a photocopy of your debit card. You can't do an early pickup at your daughter's school by showing a copy of your electric bill. Mr. President, Republicans believe that we should apply the same standard to voting. The American people are presenting their photo IDs on a regular basis and having a pretty easy go of it. We don't think it's too much to ask for the same when they go to vote. Mr. President, ask anyone on the street for their ID. Chances are they're going to pull out their driver's license, not their water bill. The American people know what an ID is. I guess we're still waiting for Democrats here in the Senate to figure it out. Mr. President, I yield the floor, and I suggest the absence of a quorum.
The clerk will call the roll.
Ms. Elsa Brooks.
Yeah, while they do their role, I wanted to go ahead and jump and respond to a few of the chats really quick before we move on. So, forgive me if I pronounce your name incorrectly. I believe that's Michiel. I apologize if I butchered that name. I greatly apologize. It says voter suppression with the SAVE Act. If you were female, you would be concerned. In what way? I did respond to you in the chat by asking, that's untrue. Could you substantiate? So no one would be suppressed due to the SAVE Act. It's as simple as getting a driver's license, getting an ID, If you are a divorced woman, then you can go ahead and get your original name. You have to change over a few documents, which is all easily to do. I don't understand where the suppression comes about. Until then, they're trying to set up a rigged election again. So you need an ID to get a job, but not to vote. Crazy. It's crazy work. Brandon says, what's crazy, try to go on The View, you have to have ID and they do a background check, but them ladies say no, voter ID. Yeah, it's crazy. Let's continue, please.
Ambition, worse. The Iranian regime, worse. More entrenched, more radical. Gas prices, worse. Over $4 a gallon. Iran's nuclear ambitions, worse. They're still intact. And America's standing in the world, worse. As the Europeans and our Asian, Middle Eastern allies, and so many others, are very exasperated with Donald Trump and this country right now. So, Strait of Hormuz, worse. Iranian regime change, worse. Gas prices, worse. Iran's nuclear ambition, worse. American credibility, worse. Everything has been made worse by Donald Trump's war of choice. Donald Trump promised total and complete victory. Instead, he delivered total and complete chaos. That's not victory, that's failure. Donald Trump hasn't even clearly articulated what victory would look like, let alone achieve it. Instead, he has lurched from one reckless idea to the next, with no strategy, no endgame, no coalition of allies. And the consequences, unfortunately, are piling up. Russia's oil revenues are surging, buoyed by Donald Trump's decision to ease pressure and destabilize global markets. An adversary that is fueling the war in Ukraine is now benefiting from this chaos. And at home, Americans are paying a very high price. Inflation is rising again, driven in part by the spike in energy costs. So Americans are paying the price there. Mortgage rates are climbing. Consumer confidence has hit record lows. Donald Trump is leading our troops into a literal minefield abroad and leading American families into an economic minefield here at home. So let's call Trump's Iran policy for what it is. Not Operation Epic Fury, Operation Epic Failure. Operation Epic Failure is a much more appropriate name for Trump's war of choice. And 45 days into this war, Congress has been sidelined because our Republican colleagues refuse to take a strong stand against this war and duck it completely because they're afraid of Trump. No hearings, no oversight, no serious oversight, no accountability, not one. I say to my Republican friends, this is not how democracy conducts a war. That is not what the Constitution allows. So if Republicans refuse to do their job, Senate Democrats will force the issue. Under the War Powers Act, we will bring a resolution to the floor this week, led by Senator Tammy Duckworth, a combat veteran who understands the true cost of war far more than Donald Trump ever has. And we will not stop there. If Republicans block it, we will vote again and again and again, every single week, until Operation Epic Failure ends or Congress does its job and authorizes it, which I know it won't, given how bad this war is. Because our troops deserve a mission, not a mess. They deserve a strategy, not chaos. And they deserve leaders who understand that sending Americans into harm's way is a most serious decision a nation can make. Our Republican colleagues face a simple choice: stand with Americans or stand with Trump's failed war. Stand with our troops or keep them in harm's way without a plan. Stand with the American people or keep asking them to pay more for gas, more for groceries, and more for a war that has made everything worse. We will keep forcing that choice. We will keep forcing that choice, my Republican colleagues. You won't be able to keep ducking it. I'd like to thank Senator Kaine for his tremendous leadership on this issue. I'd like to thank Senator Booker and the members of our caucus for working with me to ensure we have these votes week after week, unrelenting, until Republicans are ready to stand up, listen to the pleas of Americans, and do their job. Now, on DHS and Department of Homeland Security and Reconciliation. And like Trump's disasters abroad, Republicans are ignoring their disasters domestically as well. Instead of ending Trump's disastrous war in Iran and addressing the affordability crisis that is crushing working families across the country, Republicans continue to sow chaos here at home by keeping the Department of Homeland Security in a state of shutdown. Democrats put forward common sense, bipartisan reforms to rein in ICE and Border Patrol's lawless activity. Reforms, I might add, that most Americans support and that local police departments across the country practice every single day. To be clear, Republicans could open DHS if they wanted to. We also passed twice a bill that would easily fund all of DHS aside from ICE and CBP. But no, House Republicans would rather bog down the Senate in a partisan clown show with their reconciliation proposal. Why? To placate Stephen Miller and an unelected ideologue that has built a career rooted in cruelty. So let's be clear what Republicans have chosen. Not a clean funding bill with common sense reforms, not bipartisan solutions, because they can't support these things. Instead, they fight them because Trump and Stephen Miller forced them to be opposed to the common sense proposals we have made that most Americans support. The Republicans here in the Senate and the House have chosen chaos. They're dragging the Senate through a painful, arduous, and partisan reconciliation process, not because it's the best path, but because they cannot and will not rein in ICE and Border Patrol or stop the violence. They want less accountability, not more, because Donald Trump and Stephen Miller told them so. That is disgraceful, dysfunctional, a disservice to the American people. Americans want ICE and Border Patrol reined in. They do not want to see the Senate give ICE and CBP a blank check so that these rogue agencies can continue to act with impunity, unleashing violence and disorder on our streets. They do not want to see an extremist like Stephen Miller calling the shots on American immigration policy. Instead of listening to Americans, Republicans in the House and Senate are obeying their orders from Trump and Stephen Miller. On the SAVE Act and election interference, perhaps it's unsurprising that an administration and a party that is so out of touch with the American electorate and so fearful of a November washout would go to such great lengths to rig the rules in their favor. But that's exactly what Donald Trump and the GOP are doing. Yesterday, the Brennan Center reported that more than half of local elected officials are concerned that political leaders will interfere in their work. We all go to the polls. We see these election workers. They're dedicated. It's an act of patriotism when they sit by the polls and count the votes and administer the election fairly. But Donald Trump and the GOP threaten them. I would be worried, too, based on what we're seeing, from Donald Trump's party if I were an election official. Apparently, the GOP has given up on trying to win over the electorate by delivering results, so they're instead trying to change the electorate with their SAVE Act. It would kill online, mail, and motor registration, forcing Americans to drive, sometime hours, to register in person. That's hard and costly in the best of times, but especially when gas is $4 a gallon. It would purge millions of Americans from the voter rolls. It would make it harder for married women to vote, and it would reject the most common form of IDs Americans use to register. The only thing Republicans are trying to save with this legislation is their own skin in the next election. The only thing they're trying to save is their own skin, because they know they're going down to defeat electorally. If the GOP spent the same time and energy trying to deliver for working families as it does trying to rig the rules, maybe Republicans would have a chance. But that's not what they're doing. And we're going to do everything we can to stop this evil act from ever becoming law. I yield the floor.
You know what I find amazing about that is that Chuck Schumer, who's talking about the SAVE Act, he's speaking it in such an indigenous way. But my thing is this, Chuck Schumer, you're the same one that were saying that the SAVE Act was a form of slavery. But it's almost like the Democratic Party forgets where they come from and who they used to be. Let's remind them.
I will admit, our Democrat colleagues should be experts in Jim Crow, because it was Democrat politicians who passed the Jim Crow laws. It was Democrat politicians who founded the Ku Klux Klan. It was Democrat politicians for decade after decade who enforced discrimination, separate but equal, poll taxes, and a host of other laws designed to prevent African Americans from voting. But do you know who has rejected their disingenuous claim that photo ID to vote is Jim Crow? The Supreme Court of the United States. Supreme Court of the United States, the state of Indiana, passed photo ID law requiring that you show a photo ID to vote. And a group of left-wing plaintiffs filed litigation challenging that. Now, I will admit, our Democrat...
Yes, it's pretty damning that these same Democratic Party leaders were the ones who were very big on keeping the border closed, and they was very big on immigration, and all of a sudden they changed their stance. And now all of a sudden, again, they're changing their stance once again when it comes to voter ID, because they need a new voter base. Again, to everyone that is in the chat, please make sure you're double tapping your screen. And also, please make sure you subscribe and turn your bell notification on. I greatly appreciate each and every last one of you for being here. Let us continue with the recap of the morning.
To the Wolf nomination.
Without objection.
Thank you, Mr. President. Mr. President, I come to the floor today to tell you, to tell the body, and to tell the country that Republicans are going to fully fund immigrations and customs enforcement, as well as Border Patrol, and we're going to do it through the end of President Trump's term in the White House, all the way through, not just to the end of this year, this fiscal year, the calendar year, all the way till the end of the time that President Trump is in the White House. And we can do it without a single Democrat vote, and we're going to move forward without them. The Democrats want to defund law enforcement in America. It's disgraceful. It's shameful. But that's who that party has become. They want to end immigration enforcement in the United States. Republicans will never let that happen. Senator Schumer and the Democrats engineered this dangerous, reckless shutdown that we're currently living in. It is a shutdown of American security and American law enforcement. Now, they've done it for one reason. They would rather protect illegal immigrant criminals than protect law-abiding American citizens. For the last 2 months, Democrats have fought to turn America into what some would call a sanctuary country, what I would call into a country that harbors and protects illegal immigrants. That is what they are trying to do. Those are their beliefs. They rally around the country to proclaim it. They voted to defund ICE. They voted to defund Border Patrol, the very men and women who are hired to keep our nation safe and secure. They tried to ban masks on ICE agents. Well, that would allow the gangs of radical thugs who travel the streets at some of these rallies to threaten agents in their own homes, to terrorize their families. That was the demands that the Democrats made in the negotiations. They all have one thing in common. They make our nation less safe. Clear and simple. They make America less safe. That's who the Democrats are. And that is why Republicans have rejected all of the things that they've been demanding. Thanks to Republicans, immigration enforcement and border security will be fully funded. And they'll be funded without conceding a single radical Democrat demand. Democrats have spent the last 2 months trying to handcuff ICE and Border Patrol agents. Republicans are going to make sure that ICE and Border Patrol is fully funded as long as President Trump is in the White House. So here's what comes next. I met with President Trump at the White House on Friday afternoon. Senator Lindsey Graham, who's chairman of the Budget Committee, and I visited with the president. We shared with him that Senate Republicans are not slowing down. We're united around a targeted, focused reconciliation bill. And we are moving immediately and quickly to fully fund and strengthen ICE and Border Patrol. We're going to do it with a simple majority right here in the United States Senate, and we're going to do it for the long term. No more hostage taking by the radical Democrats. The safety and security of the American people is much too important for that. Senate Republicans intend to meet President Trump's June 1st deadline. The men and women of ICE and Border Patrol are American heroes. They protect our nation from murderers, from drug traffickers, from rapists. They protect our nation from repeat illegal immigrant criminals. These are the individuals who should not have been left into the country in the first place when Joe Biden and the Democrats let 10 million illegal immigrants flood into our nation during those 4 years. When Democrats obstruct this critical work, innocent Americans pay the price. Remember Sheridan Gorman? She was 18 years old, just 18 years old, and a student in Chicago. Last month in Chicago, she was shot and killed in cold blood by an illegal immigrant criminal. Sheridan's killer entered our nation in 2023. The Biden administration let him in. He was one of 10 million illegal immigrants allowed to enter the country. And of course, Chicago's sanctuary city laws, they're proud of there, it shielded him from deportation. The city of Chicago and their mayor protected him. He turns to be a murderer. And don't forget Richard Williams. He was that 83-year-old United States Air Force veteran. Last month in New York City, the minority leader's hometown, he was shoved on the subway tracks by an illegal immigrant criminal. Died of his injuries. His killer had a lengthy criminal record, but the sanctuary city laws of New York protected him. So he kept doing criminal deeds and acts against American people and our properties. Sheridan Gorman deserved better. Richard Williams deserved better. Every American citizen in every American community deserves better than what the Democrats are trying to hoist upon all of us. This is what Republicans are fighting for. That's why we're here. From day one, President Trump and Republicans have fought alone to secure the border and to enforce the law. Democrats responded with opposition, with obstruction, with extremism. Republicans will do what's necessary to fully fund our national security, and we will protect law-abiding citizens, not illegal immigrant criminals. The American people have long demanded secure borders and safe communities. President Trump and Republican leadership is going to continue to deliver. Mr. President, Senator Schumer and the Democrats may scream. They're not going to stop us. Thank you, Mr. President. I yield the floor. Suggests the absence of a quorum.
Yeah, and to really just give a recap of, who and what he was that he was just talking about, I want to play this clip right here.
We're going to continue to pray for those victims.
Will you take this opportunity to apologize to Sheridan's parents for the policies that you promoted that would directly cause her death? That suspect would not be in the city, would not be in the country, but for your policies. Will you take this opportunity to apologize?
Well, again, I believe that we're all grieving the loss of Sheridan and other folks who have lost their lives because of senseless violence. And let's just be very clear, between the Safety Act and the Welcoming City Ordinance. The Welcoming City Ordinance was passed 40 years ago by the first Black mayor in the history of Chicago. And the Safety Act was passed under the governor, at that time, who was a Republican, Governor Rauner. Thank you for your question.
So you will not apologize to Sheridan's parents?
Hi, Mayor.
No apology.
Yeah, he wouldn't even apologize to the parents of Sheridan Gorman. And I think it's pretty disgusting, even what Pritzker did in this clip right here.
Beyond the borders of Illinois, there have been real failures. Those failures, of course, extend beyond the borders of Illinois. That's their national failures, a failure to have comprehensive immigration reform, a failure of the president to follow his own edict to go after the worst of the worst. There have been real failures.
Yeah, I hope people are just really paying attention to what it is that the Democratic Party is doing. They're blaming the border being open, the border that Joe Biden opened up wide open. They're blaming that on Trump now. They're blaming all of the illegal immigrants that's in the country causing all of this harm to American citizens and civilians, their children, it's women, it's men, it's elderly, it's young. They're blaming that on Trump. I really hope people are paying attention to that because it's really disgusting. And this isn't the first time that this has happened. This has happened over a multitude of times where they take all of these instances of actions and crimes committed by illegal aliens and they blame Trump for it. It's just like, wait, y'all the ones that opened the border. That doesn't make any sense. Right? I mean, it's politics.
Congresses, I and others in this body have been trying to bring attention to Swiss banks trying to hide assets that they accumulated during World War II.
Jababa Boya says they are not blaming it on Trump. That's absolutely what he just said. What do you mean? Maybe I misheard what he said. Let me try again. Because maybe I didn't hear what he said.
There have been real failures.
There have been real failures.
Those failures, of course, extend beyond the borders of Illinois.
Those failures extend beyond the borders of Illinois.
It's their national failures.
They're national failures.
It's a failure to have comprehensive immigration reform. A
failure to have comprehensive immigration reform.
Failure of the president.
Failure of the president. Now, let me ask a question. Who is the United States president in 2026? Can anybody answer? And can anybody in the chat answer that question for me? Who is the United States president in 2026? Who is the United States president in 2025? Can anybody in the chat answer that question for me? Be greatly appreciated. Because I'm trying to understand exactly what Pritzker is saying here. If Pritzker is saying that this is a failure of the president of the United States of America, oh, okay. I just wanted to make sure that I wasn't going crazy. So if he's saying the president of the United States of America is failing at immigration reform, wouldn't that be, you talking about an overall failure? No. We're going by the words that he used in this clip. Let's name them out.
There have been real failures.
There's been real failures.
Those failures, of course, extend beyond the borders of Illinois.
Beyond the borders of Illinois.
National failures, a failure to have comprehensive immigration reform. A
comprehensive immigration reform.
Failure of the president.
Failure of the president.
Follow his own edict.
To follow his own edict.
Go after the worst of the worst.
To go after the worst of the worst. Now, let me make sure I'll also qualify his statement. Did Joe Biden ever make the statement that he was going to go after the worst of the worst? Did Joe Biden ever make that statement? Did Joe Biden ever promise to close the border? Did Joe Biden ever promise to work on immigration reform? And prior to Joe Biden, I believe President Trump was president before Joe Biden. And prior to President Trump, I believe there was President Barack Obama. So I'm just trying to understand. There's only been one president since after Obama to speak on immigration, to speak on the border problem. So to the person in the chat, say he's talking about an overall failure. No, it sounds to me like he's talking about Trump. And it sounds to me like he and other Democratic politicians want to blame all of the problems of illegal immigration on Trump. But here's the problem. The Democratic Party, led by Joe Biden, was the ones who opened up the border. So they're trying to offload their problem onto Trump and make it Trump's problem. Got you. Okay. Just so we all understand, I just wanted to make sure we get a clear understanding of that. Thank you.
And joining my colleagues in efforts to make sure that justice is done for the wealth and other private property that was taken from Jewish people who died in the Holocaust. So once again, I'm back to give a report and an update on that effort. In February this year, I chaired a bipartisan hearing on my ongoing Credit Suisse Nazi account investigation. That hearing was supposed to, in part, highlight the collaborative and cooperative work of the bank UBS, which bought Credit Suisse, along with Neil Barofsky, the Simon Wiesenthal Center, and the Senate Judiciary Committee. And what we have achieved up to that point. UBS had committed to fully exposing the wrongs committed by Credit Suisse. After all, the information about Nazi evils belongs to humanity. But when UBS was informed that my committee may potentially hold a hearing, the previous cooperation that we got from UBS was scaled back. Mr. Borowski testified this to the committee, quote, shortly after I told UBS that this committee was considering holding this hearing, UBS informed me that it would, for the first time, conduct a privileged review and withhold certain relevant privileged material from me and my team, end of quote, from Mr. Borowski, the chief investigator of the information that we're trying to get from UBS. Now, according to Mr. Borowski, UBS leadership provided misleading information to the committee, even after being warned that they were misleading the Judiciary Committee. For example, at the hearing, UBS testified that it had withheld fewer than 150 documents from Mr. Borowski. But Mr. Borowski said his team emailed UBS before our hearing expressing concern that using the word document was misleading, end of quote. Mr. Borowski said in this instance, the word document actually meant, quote, hundreds or even thousands of pages of many different documents together, end of quote. Following the hearing, Mr. Borowski told the committee that he urged UBS to, quote, correct any misimpressions it may have made upon the committee when it referenced the number of withheld and redacted documents as being only 150, end of quote. And according to Borowski, these documents are, quote, relevant to the question of whether a Nazi had an account or didn't have an account with Credit Suisse. To date, UBS hasn't provided a true account of the amount of pages at issue. However, Mr. Borowski informed the committee that as of March 11th, 2026, approximately 23,000 pages of materials had been redacted or withheld from him. UBS also took legal action against the Simon Wiesenthal Center. Last week, thank God, a federal court in New York issued a ruling against UBS's efforts. However, if the bank were successful in that court case, it could have blocked the Simon Wiesenthal Center from fully speaking on all Holocaust issues. Very much a violation of First Amendment rights of freedom of speech. Following the committee hearing, UBS failed to fully and completely respond to all questions for the record submitted by members of the Judiciary Committee. Now, I'm going to talk about a Mr. Kurofsky, not different than Mr. Borowski. Mr. Kurofsky is president of the UBS Americas. That bank literally failed to answer any questions posed to him during the hearing. His disrespect for the committee is noted. So be on notice, Mr. Kurofsky. So I kept the hearing record open, and this week I've sent additional questions for the record to the bank, UBS, and to others. Mr. Borowski has told Mr. Kurofsky has since provided supplemental responses. He's informed the committee that UBS has refused to investigate credible leads on Nazis and their facilitators, looting of Jewish assets, and facilitation of rat lines. He's also told the committee that UBS has imposed an arbitrary July 31st, 2026 deadline for completing this investigative work. Certainly, as I am an investigator, I understand timelines and deadlines, but I also know that you can't enforce deadlines at the expense of quality of the investigation. UBS has taken the position that it, in and of itself, will decide after what they're going to do to cooperate, after the current investigation concludes, whether to investigate remaining leads. Now, this senator was born at night, but not last night. UBS needs to quit playing games and get the job done right away. UBS has spent millions of dollars on investigative work. Why not investigate these Nazi evils right now? What are they trying to hide? UBS's current position will unnecessarily create a cloud of doubt over the final report of investigation. As I said in March, I plan to call a follow-up hearing before the end of this year. My goal is that this hearing will bring closure to the investigation in a way that brings justice to the Jewish community and the victims of the Holocaust. UBS's conduct is interfering with that ultimate goal, and given their recent national charter bank approval by the U.S. government, UBS has a heightened responsibility to be fully forthcoming on this matter. I urge them to get back on the right side where they once were, because looked like we had very faithful and dedicated communication by the bank to our investigation. And why all this impeding of further investigation, I don't understand. I encourage Mr. Borowski and the Simon Wiesenthal Center to keep my investigative team updated on all ongoing matters, whether it's good or whether it's bad. This senator's efforts to expose Nazi evils will not stop. I yield.
Mr. President,
Senator of Arkansas.
today I urge my Senate colleagues to vote to confirm the nomination of the Honorable John Thomas Shepard to the United States District Court for the Western District of Arkansas. Throughout his career, Judge Shepard has worked to uphold the rule of law, preserve public safety, and keep crime out of our state. Whether representing the people as a prosecuting attorney, presiding from the bench as a circuit judge, or practicing law in the private sector, Judge Shepard has handled a wide range of cases with an exceptional track record. Those who know Judge Shepard can attest to his professionalism, his commitment to serving Arkansans, and his dedication to his family, many of whom have also answered the call to public service. A native of El Dorado, Judge Shepard is also a leader in his community, serving as a volunteer youth coach for the Boys and Girls Club, a radio color analyst for the El Dorado High School football team, and an active member of his church. I am pleased to support Judge Shepard's nomination, and I urge my Senate colleagues to vote to support his confirmation as well. Thank you. I yield the floor.
My bad, y'all. I stepped away for just a second, but I was listening in. One thing I can say about both Democratic and Republican politicians is I wish they would stay on topic. If we're going to start the morning off with talking about one topic, let's stay on topic and stick to that one topic. Let's go ahead and fast forward. As we continue our recap, please make sure you're double tapping the screen and liking the stream, and also subscribing, turning the notifications on.
The yeas are 53. The nays are 45. The motion is agreed to.
Mr. President.
The clerk will now report the nomination.
Nomination, the judiciary, Christopher R. Wolf of Texas to be United States District Judge for the Western District of Texas.
Mr. President, I ask unanimous consent to complete this unanimous consent request before we recess.
Without objection.
Thank you. Mr. President, last month, America lost a man who devoted his life to serving America. Robert Mueller. He passed away on March 20th. He left behind an amazing legacy of patriotism, honesty, and integrity, and courage. In 1968, at the height of the Vietnam War, Robert Mueller chose to enlist in the Marine Corps. He was a rifle platoon leader. Years later, he said that of all of his accomplishments in life, He was, quote, most proud the Marine Corps deemed me worthy of leading other Marines. He earned a Bronze Star for valor when his platoon was ambushed, suffering multiple casualties. He personally rescued a wounded Marine. He earned a Purple Heart after being wounded by enemy fire while leading his platoon to rescue soldiers who were pinned down by the enemy. While Mr. Mueller his time in the Marines ended in 1970, that is far from the end of his service to this country. After his military service, Robert Mueller became a lawyer and spent most of his life in public service. A lifelong Republican. He served for many years as a prosecutor and senior Justice Department official under both Republican and Democratic presidents alike. Throughout the 1990s, Mr. Mueller would serve in various positions at the Department of Justice, working as a senior litigator in the homicide section of the U.S. Attorney's Office for the District of Columbia and as U.S. Attorney for the Northern District of California. Mueller's work won him the admiration.
Okay, I don't know what the hell is going on with that, but quick check for everybody that's still here. Please put a 1 in the chat if you are still here. Please put a 1 in the chat if you are still here. Why is it saying video unavailable? What in the hell happened? Hold on, y'all. They took the video down? They took the video down. Wait a minute. Oh, wait, stop. We can't view what happened with government? Hold on. Okay, let's try this one. I believe not they taking videos down. That's all right.
Courage.
There we go.
In 1968, at the height of the Vietnam War, Robert Mueller chose to enlist in the Marine Corps. He was a rifle platoon leader. Years later, he said that of all of his accomplishments in life, he was, quote, most proud the Marine Corps deemed me worthy of leading other Marines. He earned a Bronze Star for valor when his platoon was ambushed, suffering multiple casualties. He personally rescued a wounded Marine. He earned a Purple Heart after being wounded by enemy fire while leading his platoon to rescue soldiers who were pinned down by the enemy. While Mr. Mueller his time in the Marines ended in 1970, that is far from the end of his service to this country. After his military service, Robert Mueller became a lawyer and spent most of his life in public service. A lifelong Republican. He served for many years as a prosecutor.
Brandon, I didn't get an email from YouTube, so we still good. They just took the video down over there.
Senior Justice Department official under both Republican and Democratic presidents alike. Throughout the 1990s, Mr. Mueller would serve in various positions at the Department of Justice, working as a senior litigator in the homicide section of the U.S. Attorney's Office for the District of Columbia and as U.S. Attorney for the Northern District of California. Mueller's work won him the admiration of both President George W. Bush and the United States Senate. 1 week before September 11th, 2001, Bob Mueller was sworn in as director of the FBI. In the aftermath of the horrific 9/11 terrorist attack, Bob Mueller worked tirelessly to make our nation safe. Director Mueller led the FBI at a tumultuous time. After the worst terror attack in American history, Bob Mueller, more than any single individual, was responsible for modernizing the FBI to combat the threats we face in the 21st century. It was my honor to support him in that effort. It is no surprise that when his term with the FBI was set to expire in 2011, President Obama asked the Senate to extend Mueller's term by 2 years. The vote in the Senate was unanimous, 100-0 in favor of Bob Mueller, as it should have been. Mr. Mueller left the FBI in 2013, yet even that was not the end of his service to the American people. In 2017, Director Mueller was asked to serve his nation one last time. Deputy Attorney General Rod Rosenstein, a Trump appointee, asked Mueller to serve as special counsel to investigate Russia's efforts to interfere in the 2016 election. While my colleagues and I have spent many years debating the merits of the Mueller report, his work on Russia's interference in the 2016 election and throughout his time at DOJ and FBI demonstrate true character, hard work, courage, honesty, professionalism, and a dedication to our Constitution. In honor of his legacy, I introduced a resolution with my colleagues from Virginia, his home state, that recognize the contributions Bob Mueller made to our nation. I will now make a unanimous consent request to pass the resolution. I ask unanimous consent that notwithstanding Rule 22, as if in legislative session, the Senate proceed to the consideration of my resolution, which is at the desk. Further, I ask unanimous consent that the resolution be agreed to, the preamble be agreed to, and that the motions to reconsider be considered, made, and laid upon the table with no intervening action or debate.
Is there objection?
Mr. President,
Senator from Indiana.
reserving the right to object, Mr. President, of all the things that the United States Senate should be focusing on today, like funding DHS and paying our TSA agents, or protecting our elections with the Save America Act, Democrats instead are bringing yet again another resolution that's a clear political potshot against President Trump. But Democrats are more interested today in rehashing their failed attempt to delegitimize the 2016 election a decade ago than in bettering our great country. The fact of the matter is, Mr. President, the reputation of Robert Mueller is a mixed bag. And the end result of the Mueller investigation that my colleague just talked about was a farce. What's always remained constant is that Democrats just can't accept that Donald Trump won the election in 2016 fair and square. 10 years after that historic victory, Democrats are still complaining about it and advancing their Russian collusion hoax. Democrats know that the Russian collusion hoax was their attempt to undermine President Trump. They knew and they know now that it's been debunked time and time again. The Mueller investigation was meant to stop President Trump and derail his agenda that he was elected by the American people to advance in 2016, and it was very costly to the American people and to this great country. Robert Mueller will always be intertwined with the Russian collusion hoax that greatly damaged this country. This resolution adds fuel to a fire that really burned out a long time ago. It's just another political hit job at President Trump, and I'm not going to go along with it today. Mr. President, there are so many more important things that we should be doing on the floor today, again, like funding DHS or protecting our elections. With that, I object.
The objection is heard.
Mr. President.
Now, before we continue, it's one thing that I would like to pull up on the screen really quickly. I think a lot of people feel like this as well. We wake up, the Democrats do something blatantly illegal, GOP politicians are outraged, and nothing happens. Then we wake up, and Republicans do something blatantly illegal, and the Democratic politicians are outraged, and then nothing happens. This is a repeating cycle within politics. The bad part is that when you wake up, the Democrats will say that the Republicans did something blatantly illegal. Then you go to sleep, and then you wake up. And then the Republicans will say that the Democrats did something that was blatantly illegal. And then the GOP politicians are outraged, and then the Democratic politicians are outraged. And yet again, nothing happens. And then we go to sleep, and we wake up again. That's typically how it goes in this political cycle. The bad part is when we talk about the Russian hoax, we can actually pull up the approved for release by the DNI on July 17th of 2025, cyber manipulation of the U.S. election infrastructure to remain a challenge. We assesses that Russian and criminal actors did not impact recent U.S. election results by conducting malicious cyber activities against election infrastructure. Russian government-affiliated actors most likely compromised an Illinois' voter registration database and unsuccessfully attempted the same in other states. Election monitoring and the type of systems targeted, infrastructure not used to cast or count votes, make it highly unlikely it would have resulted in altering any state's official vote result. Criminal activity also failed to reach the scale and sophistication necessary to change election outcomes. New election technology in the future that decreases diversity in systems and expands computer-enabled functions provides additional avenues to manipulate votes, but it will remain a significant challenge to sway elections through cyber means. Possible Russian government-affiliated cyber actors extracted voter data, mostly containing names and addresses of voters, from the Illinois Board of Elections registration database in July that lacked adequate security safeguards. We also observed scanning and similar efforts against Secretary of State systems and websites in up to more than 20 states from servers operated by a Russian-owned company with ties to Russian military cyber actors. The same infrastructure was used against Illinois. The thing is, this is something that has been highly contested for quite some time when we talk about all of this Russian hoax. But we go back to something like this.
People who say, well, Tulsi, if you go to odni.gov, people who say, well, Tulsi, this is just your view or your interpretation. No, it's all in hundreds of pages of documents that I've declassified and released that show point by point exactly what happened through this timeline that showed this very dangerous thing that occurred in the creation of Russiagate, the creation of this manufactured intelligence assessment that essentially had the intent of undermining the voices and votes of the American people who elected Donald Trump. They were not happy with the outcome of that election. And so they created this politicized, weaponized piece of fake intelligence that, as you mentioned, then went on to serve as a foundation for everything that came after, the multiple investigations, the years-long Mueller investigation, 2 congressional impeachments, investigations in the raid at Mar-a-Lago. The list goes on and on. Ultimately, the real crime here was against the American people because this action singularly undermined the integrity of our democratic republic. What to speak of the fact that some of those folks and those 37 individuals that we directed the revocation of security clearances from today by under the direction of President Trump, they aided and abetted in this action, this seditious conspiracy that undermined our democracy, undermined our republic, and broke that sacred trust that every one of these professionals is supposed to have from the American people.
Yeah, and that's pretty much what it laid out to. We understand from the documents that was released by Tulsi Gabbard that when it comes down to it, it was, make sure I got this correct, Obama knew, Clinton knew, Biden knew, Comey knew, Brennan knew, McCabe knew, Strux knew, Clapper knew, Rosenstein knew, FBI knew, DOJ knew, CIA knew, State knew. They all knew Donald Trump was innocent, but they smeared and spied on him. The worst scandal in our nation's history. Well, I would disagree with that statement. I would say that the worst scandal in our nation's history was Obamacare. We all remember when she stood up there and said that you have to sign it before you have to pass the bill before you can read it. Y'all know Nancy Pelosi. Y'all know how Nancy Pelosi work. Those Democrats, they love to pull bullshit over your eyes and then tell you that, oh, it wasn't our fault. This is for the betterment of the people. Yeah, okay. You're right. Let's continue.
Mr.
Democratic
President,
whip.
I'm disappointed that the junior senator from Indiana has blocked the Senate from honoring an American hero, Bob Mueller, who protected our national security with his life and for decades served the call to public service. This is so unusual, to come to the floor and to honor someone who has served the country the way Bob Mueller did, and to have an objection. And to say that it was a, quote, political potshot against Donald Trump, it was not at all. The effort that I made on the floor was to extol the virtues of a man who served this country and risked his life for this country over and over again. My colleague is objecting for one reason only. President Donald Trump despises Robert Mueller and his memory because Trump's own administration appointed Mueller as special counsel to investigate Russia's efforts to interfere in the 2016 election. Mr. Mueller's comprehensive investigation resulted in 37 indictments, 7 guilty pleas or convictions, and 14 criminal referrals to other U.S. Department of Justice counterparts. This to Donald Trump was an unforgivable sin. Do you remember what President Trump said when he heard that this man died? Exactly what he said. The President of the United States said about Mueller, quote, "Good, I'm glad he's dead." Good, I'm glad he's dead. Words from the mouth of the President of the United States, a man who poses as the Messiah or some doctor. I don't understand which. Good.
Come on with the sentimental bullshit. We know how Democrats reacted when Charlie Kirk was assassinated. We know how America reacted when Charlie Kirk's funeral happened. We know how America reacted and how the Democratic liberals reacted all across social media as they tried to drag Charlie Kirk's name through the mud. Stop it. Stop it. I will never forget how Jasmine Crockett, I can't remember who else it was, when it was on the House floor, they was asking for a moment of silence for the assassination and remembrance on the assassination of Charlie Kirk. And they screamed out, "No, no, no." Yeah, they celebrated and destroyed his vigils. Stop it. Robert Mueller, as decorated as a person that he was with his military background and his litigious work, can we all just be honest for a second? Robert Mueller was an attack dog to go after Trump. And they threw all the money that they possibly could at Robert Mueller to get Trump out of there. And he did everything he possibly could except his job, was to get Trump out of there. That's the truth. Let's continue.
I'm glad he's dead. The President of the United States, the Commander-in-Chief, responded to the passing of a Marine, Bob Mueller, who received a Purple Heart and a Bronze Star. This is not the first time the President has attacked an American war hero. I'm sorry that the Senator from Indiana joined in that attack, but we cannot pretend this cruel and un-American behavior is normal. I'm sorry for the Senator from Indiana sees it differently. And I want to say to Bob Mueller's family, who I believe is watching, he is still an American hero in my eyes. And though this political move was made on the floor, and it seldom is made, I'm sorry. It doesn't change one bit the fact that Bob Mueller served this country honorably, with dignity and character his whole life. I yield the floor.
Under the previous order, the Senate stands in recess until 2:15 p.m.
Sweet. While they go into recess and while I fast forward as we continue down this recap, please make sure that y'all are double tapping your screen to like the stream. Also, make sure that you subscribe and got your bell notifications on. We do run a show over here every weekend called Weekend at Willie's. We start at 3 p.m. every Saturday, Central Standard Time. Let's continue. Did I fast forward it? Yeah, I did fast forward it.
Christie and Amanda. President.
The senator from Minnesota.
Mr. President, I ask unanimous consent that two.
Did he just say senator from Minnesota? Hold on.
President.
The senator from Minnesota.
Oh, I know this is about to be some bullshit. Anything coming out of Minnesota is bullshit. We all know it's all bullshit.
Mr. President, I ask unanimous consent that two fellows from my office, Nina Christie and Amanda Azovinu, be granted floor privileges until the end of this Congress.
Without objection.
Thank you, Mr. President. Mr. President, I rise today to discuss a Congressional Review Act resolution, House Resolution 140 that could come before the Senate any time over the next 2 weeks. And I want to speak directly to my Republican colleagues about this CRA and why you should vote against it. This CRA would roll back protections for the Boundary Waters Wilderness in northeastern Minnesota. It would allow copper nickel sulfide mining in the watershed of the Boundary Waters, which would be devastating to the wilderness. The decision that the Senate makes, that we will make in the coming weeks, will have long-term implications for the Boundary Waters, certainly, but it will also have long-term implications for how we go about protecting public lands around the country going forward. So I want to start with the core point, being a Minnesota senator, that Minnesota is a mining state. We support mining, just not this mine in this place. Minnesota is a mining and natural resources state. We have a
JS Undudu says, remember the last time we had a balanced budget? It was the Democrats. Yeah, that was up under Bill Clinton. You know what I also remember about Bill Clinton? How Bill Clinton destroyed the housing market by making the worst decision possible for the American people by brutalizing the codes for loans and for taxes when it comes to the housing market. Of course, the budget was balanced up under Bill Clinton. Does that mean anything good? No. Can you tell me the last time the United States military was audited and end up under what president? And when is the last time they passed that audit? I can tell you this much. You're going to have a very hard time at finding that information because every United States military up under every president has all been audited and they've all failed. But this is politics, baby. We understand. We understand.
Wealth of natural resources. And mining is a really important part of our economy. We are proud to be the #1 source of iron for the whole country. We produced 3/4 of the iron that went into the tanks and planes that led us to victory in World War II. And we're still producing most of the nation's iron ore today. And it is also true there are other potential mines in Minnesota that are currently under consideration and development that would produce copper and nickel and other precious metals. Responsible mining is an economic driver in Minnesota, and it is part of our history and it is part of our future. So, why oppose this CRA, which would pave the way for developing a copper nickel sulfide mine on the doorstep of the Boundary Waters? Well, so colleagues, I want to give you 3 reasons why this is a bad idea. The first is this is an incredibly special place. It is beloved by Minnesota and beloved by people around the country. And this mine in this place poses an unacceptable risk. For those of you who haven't been to the Boundary Waters, I want you to picture 1 million acres of pristine lakes and bogs and rivers. There's a wealth of hunting and fishing resources. People canoe everywhere. I was there, Mr. President, last summer, just on a day trip into the Boundary Waters, and I saw 2 wolves just on that one day. You'll find here some of the cleanest, freshest water any place in the world. You can go out into the middle of lakes and dip your cup into the water and drink the water right from the lake. You see lake trout and northern pike and walleye. I mean, there's no place in the world that is better to be than this. And that's why over 150,000 people visit the Boundary Waters every year in the mosquito season of the summertime and in the ice and freezing cold of the wintertime. It is one of the most visited national wilderness areas in the whole country. And as a result of that, the outdoor recreation economy in northern Minnesota generates thousands of jobs. The Boundary Waters supports hundreds and hundreds of small local businesses, and it generates millions of dollars in economic activity for Minnesota. Outdoor recreation is a significant economic driver in the region around the Boundary Waters wilderness area. And what this mine would do is to put all of that at an unacceptable risk. This kind of mine has been built in other places around the country and around the world, and in 100% of the instances, this mine has caused pollution. What happens is you mine the rock underground, you bring it up to the surface. This is a copper sulfide ore, and as soon as it is exposed to the air and to water. The sulfide in the rocks turns into basically what is battery acid. And then because this mine is right on the edge of the boundary waters, in the watershed of this incredible place, that water flows into the boundary waters, ultimately into Voyageurs National Park, at great risk to the wildlife and also to the humans that are using this incredibly special place. Basically, you're putting sulfuric acid into the water and watching it flow into this place. And this reason, the dangers of this mine, which I should say, Mr. President, have been widely studied. The moratorium that is in place on mining in the boundary waters is the result of years of scientific evaluation. It is the result of hundreds of thousands of public comments saying, nope, the risks to this in this particular place are just too great. And this is why my Republican colleagues would appreciate backcountry hunters and anglers, some sportsmen's groups, Trout Unlimited, Pheasants Forever, and many other outdoor groups, people of all kinds from all over the country have weighed in and said, no, this is simply the wrong mine in the wrong place. Even descendants of the great President Theodore Roosevelt have said that we should protect this natural treasure and leave it as it is, as they said. And this is also why this mine is so unpopular in Minnesota. A recent poll showed that 70% of Minnesotans across the political spectrum, where this is not a political partisan issue, I should say, agreed that protecting the boundary waters from sulfide-based mining pollution is a very important thing for elected officials to consider. And 61% of Minnesotans expressed support for establishing a permanent state-level, permanent protections for this incredible piece of public land. So that's the first reason why this CRA does not make sense, because this is an incredibly special place and this mine poses an unacceptable risk to the resources of this place. And the second reason that I want to talk to you about, colleagues, is more of an internal Senate issue, but it is extremely important. You should oppose this CRA because it would be an unprecedented and dangerous use of the Congressional Review Act. Now, within the Senate, we know what the CRA is. It's a way for Congress to double-check the actions of the executive branch. If Congress feels that the executive branch has passed a regulation that goes too far, that doesn't follow the intent of Congress, the CRA, the Congressional Review Authority, gives Congress the power to say, wait, hold the phone. We're going to say, no, you can't do that. We're going to vote to say that regulation goes too far. Now, you've got to do that within 60 days. That makes sense, right? Because you can't have future Congresses clawing back the decisions that have been made years and years ago. Okay, but that's not what's happening here with this CRA, colleagues. What is happening here is, for the first time ever that I'm aware of, they are applying the CRA process not to a rule, but to a completely different public land order, a different statute. And what they want to do with the CRA is to claw back a public land order that was put into place 3 years ago. This was never the intention of the Congressional Review Act. The Congressional Review Act has never been used in this way before to overturn a mineral withdrawal, especially not a withdrawal that was finalized 3 years ago. Now, I think probably many of my Republican colleagues are thinking as they contemplate, is this a good idea or not? I mean, you always have to think in this body, like, what's going to happen when the shoe is on the other foot? We might do this now, but then if this tool has been sharpened to be used in this different way, how might the members of the other party use this tool in ways that we don't approve of, that we don't like? And I can tell you, Mr. President, as I've had many conversations with my colleagues on the other side of the aisle, this is something that is a big concern to folks. What would this do? What would this mean if we take this action? What would it look like if Congress gets into the business of repealing administrative actions that have been in place for years? I think many people look at that and say, well, that would just be chaos. The third reason, Mr. President, that I think it's important to oppose this CRA is that it would violate tribal treaty rights. And this is why it has been so strongly opposed by the tribal nations who have lived in the borderlands of Minnesota for time immemorial. And their rights to hunting and fishing, and for the Minnesota Chippewa tribes, their rights to harvest wild rice or manoomin, those rights are enshrined in a treaty with the federal government. And this treaty would ban this kind of mining in this area without the tribe's approval. But today, the tribes have not approved this. They have not been consulted on this. And I mean, they were consulted during the mineral withdrawal process that happened several years ago over many, many government-to-government meetings and consultations. They were consulted, but not on this. That's why the Grand Portage Band and the Minnesota Chippewa tribes that have treaty rights here have written letters expressing their strong opposition to this effort. It is why the National Congress of American Indian passed a resolution urging the Senate Committee on Senate Affairs to at least hold a hearing on the treaty implications of the CRA before moving forward, and also why they oppose this CRA. And it's also why, in solidarity with the Minnesota Anishinaabe people, the Chippewa people, tribal nations from across the country have spoken out. The Midwest Alliance of Sovereign Tribes, the White Earth Nation, Rosebud Sioux Tribe, Prairie Band of Potawatomi Nation, the Eastern Shoshone, they have all come together and said, no, we reject this CRA. Minnesota tribal leaders and Minnesota tribal members feel the same way that other Minnesotans do. We are not anti-mining, but this mine in this place poses too great a risk. Mr. President, before I wrap up, I want to address one question that I've heard quite a bit about in terms of why, what would be in favor of voting for this CRA, and I want to just give my perspective on it. So some would say that passing this CRA is important for national security. They would claim that this mine will provide a much needed domestic source of critical minerals. And I will give it to you that we need to think about this. Everybody's cell phone, I mean, so much of our modern life relies on these critical minerals. But here's the question that needs to be considered as you're making this decision. The question is, who's going to own these minerals and who's going to benefit and where is the money going to go? That is why this is really not an America First issue to vote for this CRA. Just because the minerals are mined on American United States forest land does not mean that they'll be reserved for an American market. In fact, any copper or nickel that would be mined in the Duluth complex, which is where this is, this mine would immediately be sent to our strongest global competitor of China. The rock will be pulled up, the ore will be sent by train most likely to the Pacific coast where it will be loaded onto big boats and taken to China where it will be smelted. And then it will be used either in China for their infrastructure and defense technologies, or it'll just be sold to the highest bidder. So the mine in Minnesota, it's important to understand, is a wholly owned subsidiary of Antofagasta, which is a massive Chilean conglomerate with billionaire owners. And this is one of the largest foreign mining conglomerates in the whole world. And Antofagasta, okay, has deep ties with the Chinese government and its mineral processing operations. In fact, most recently, Antofagasta, that would be building this mine in northeastern Minnesota, has secured a record-breaking zero cost, meaning that's free, processing agreement with Chinese copper smelters, all of which are state-owned, either in whole or in part. So what we're doing here with this mine is we're creating a pathway, a pipeline for this foreign company to build a mine, almost certainly polluting the boundary waters, to take the copper, to send it to China, where they then have a sweetheart deal for smelting and then sell it back out on the open market. I mean, this is not an America First strategy. So I would encourage my Republican colleagues, as you consider this, to take a look at who's benefiting from this mine. And it certainly is not going to be Minnesotans who this land belongs to, along with the rest of this country. No, the real winners of this deal are the Chilean billionaires who will further line their pockets with profits from this mine. Mr. President, should this resolution come before the Senate, I urge my colleagues to vote no on rolling back protections for the Boundary Waters Wilderness Area. We can support mining, but not this mine in this place. We can be good stewards of our natural resources, and we can support mining, but not this mine. These public lands belong to all of us, and we should not allow them to be exploited by a foreign mining company for our loss and for their gain. Thank you, Mr. President. I yield back.
And then later it was said, well, there's no capacity for ballistic missile striking. The United States are our friends in the near term. Then how about nuclear weapons? Well, we want to stop nuclear weapons, but didn't the president say 6 months ago when we attacked that we had obliterated their capacity to build nuclear weapons? He came back to say that was one of the agenda too. When you go through it, the list keeps growing. The initial explanation of why we were there had never mentioned the Straits of Hormuz. Now it's daily topic. One day we're fighting to keep them open. The next day we're fighting to keep them closed. I can't follow the bouncing ball. I don't know what the president's agenda is when it comes to the Straits of Hormuz. The fact that the president suggested last week that the United States would jointly collect payments for access to the Straits of Hormuz is beyond imaginations. These funds would be viewed as extortion funds by Iranian hardliners to rebuild the country's military and continue to fund its terrorist proxies. And after weekend talks in Pakistan, 21 hours with the vice president went absolutely nowhere. President Trump announced a U.S. blockade of the Straits of Hormuz. At a time when our gasoline prices are skyrocketing, when the revenue from oil is, because of the new barrel prices, is reaching record levels, not just for the Iranians' profit, but the profit of the Russians who use that to fight in Ukraine. For goodness sakes, who ever sat down at the table before this invasion and analyzed these possibilities? And what was their conclusion? Did we really go to war in Iran to worsen the free flow of goods in that critical Straits of Hormuz and enter into an extortion business with the Iranian regime? It's upside down. The equally productive move by the Ukrainians to try and squeeze the global economy has hurt American consumers and farmers and the global economy. I'm surprised to no one except President Trump. Americans were already struggling to make ends meet because of the president's cuts to Medicaid and the Affordable Care Act and his tariff taxes. He's doing everything he can to make this economy even worse. The increase in gas prices, now more than $4 a gallon in Chicago, may be too much for many to bear. While Americans suffer under high prices, our adversaries are reaping the benefits and profits. The increase in global oil prices and the desperate easing of some oil sanctions by Trump has been a gift to Vladimir Putin, who takes this revenue to renew his bloody war against the Ukrainians. Was that thought about before we invaded Iran? And let's not forget that Putin, who continues to snub any attempts by President Trump to end the war in Ukraine, has also been helping target American interest in the Gulf. He's not neutral. He's helping the Iranians at the expense of American soldiers. I cannot say it better than New York Times columnist, Middle East expert Tom Friedman. Here's what he wrote recently. Trump has no clue how to get out of the mess that he's created by starting a war without thinking through the implications. We desperately need a coherent plan to end this war, one that addresses the remaining highly enriched uranium still in Iran. We need a plan that stabilizes the U.S. and global economy and makes sure any further war is done with the consent of Congress. It's not too much to ask that this president, every president who wants to engage in a war, follow Article 1, Section 8 of the U.S. Constitution, which gives the authority to declare war to Congress. Notably, it's for the American people to decide through their elected members of Congress. That's why I still support Senator Tammy Duckworth's War Powers Resolution, which will be on the floor this week. It's time for us to accept our constitutional responsibility and try to get this mess under control in Iran. And if there was ever a reminder of the importance of the Constitution for the role of its elected representatives, it's in the declaration of war. This current mess reminds us that those who wrote the Constitution had real wisdom, and those who are executing the plans for this war have not demonstrated that feature. I yield the floor. Suggested with quorum.
Ms. Alsop-Brooks.
The senator from California.
I move that we dispense with the quorum call.
Without objection.
Thank you. Mr. President, as everybody knows, this last Sunday night, the world watched the people of Hungary achieve something very, very powerful. They voted an autocratic leader out of office. After 16 years of, quote, illiberal democracy, end quote, after 16 years of centralized power, crony capitalism, dismantling freedom of the press, and shredding the rule of law, Hungarian voters overwhelmingly showed up to make their voices heard, with nearly 80% of voters casting a ballot. Meanwhile, here we are in the United States of America, in the United States Senate, continuing to debate a bill that would make it harder for Americans to make their voices heard in the electoral process. Here we are, 2 weeks since Donald Trump signed yet another unlawful executive order. His order would make it harder for eligible Americans to register to vote, to stay registered to vote, to exercise their fundamental right to vote. This time targeting vote by mail. It's absurd, it's unconstitutional, and most importantly, it's not going to work. American voters will not be silenced. So he can try rigging the rules of our elections to desperately try to hold on to power, but it's not gonna work. He can try to silence the opposition in the media. It's not gonna work. He can try subverting democracy itself by shrinking the electorate and limiting how people can vote, but it's not gonna work. Because if the No King's marches are any indicator, the American people know what to do when our rights and our democracy are being attacked. The American people show up and use every lawful option available to cast a ballot and make their voices heard. We know this because we've seen it before. Yes, around the world, like in Hungary this last weekend, but also right here in the United States throughout the course of our history. And I believe strongly that we're going to see it again this November. Now, throughout our nation's history, we've steadily worked to expand the right to vote, to strengthen our democracy through lawful and inclusive participation, not by trying to further restrict it or further deny access to the ballot. From the fight for women's suffrage to the struggle against Jim Crow and the civil rights movement overall, each generation has moved us closer to the promise of a more inclusive democracy. But President Trump and his Republican enablers want to take us backwards. Because with inflation up, the cost of living up, prices at the gas pump are up, and our nation spiraling deeper into an unpopular and unlawful war in the Middle East, Donald Trump sees the writing on the wall. And if he can't rig the rules of the election, making it harder to register to vote if you're eligible, making it harder to stay registered to vote, or actually harder to cast your ballot, then maybe there's a chance that he can hold on to power. That's his only hope. Now, I know, colleagues, that we've been away for a couple of weeks. It was the state work period last week and the week prior. But here we are coming back after a couple of weeks. And let me refresh our memories as to what is before us, the SAVE Act, and what the SAVE Act specifically does. First, it requires documents like a passport or an original birth certificate in order to register to vote. Documents that tens of millions of Americans don't have readily available. Passports, just one example. Half of American citizens don't have a passport. And so it becomes a barrier to be able to register to vote, let alone trying to cast a ballot in November. The language of the SAVE Act also says that, if your name doesn't match, think about this. There's people who change their names. Most typically when people get married and choose to change their names, all of a sudden the name on your ID no longer matches the name on your birth certificate. So you're going to have to go through some extra bureaucratic hoops to be able to register and participate in our democracy. Then this bill does more. It forces Americans to register, to update their registration, or to provide proof of citizenship in person if they've been falsely flagged as ineligible. Meaning you're going to have to take some time off of work, and maybe the county elections office is near where you live or work, or maybe it's quite the distance, but that burden is now on you to continue exercising your fundamental right to vote. This bill also requires states to turn over their sensitive voter rolls to the Department of Homeland Security. Why? The Department of Homeland Security has nothing to do with election administration, but under this bill, they will run the names and voter information from the states through databases that we already know are flawed and already falsely flag eligible American voters as potential non-citizens. And when they do that, DHS then communicates it to the states, orders to remove them from the rolls. This isn't speculation. This is already happening in states that have voluntarily begun this exercise with DHS. And don't forget, colleagues, the Republican bill attacks vote by mail. The same vote by mail that 48 million Americans relied on in the last election. The same vote by mail that Donald Trump himself repeatedly has utilized as an option to cast his ballot, including a few weeks ago in a special election in Florida. So Donald Trump thinks voting by mail is safe and secure enough for him, but not for the American people? What's with that hypocrisy? So in other words, again, this is the refresher, this is the reminder, the SAVE Act is a bill that makes it harder to register to vote, harder to stay registered to vote, and harder to cast your ballot. But we know what the goal is. To quote the Legal Defense Fund, who has spoken up on this bill, this is about, quote, shrinking the electorate and controlling who can vote in America, end quote. You can try to describe it some other way. You can try to characterize it some other way, but that's the bottom line. But with this bill stalling here in the Senate, President Trump is now trying to take matters into his own hands once again. His aim is to, his words not mine, quote, take over elections, end quote, with this most recent illegal executive order that I just mentioned. He wants to force states to rely on a federal list of eligible voters created by the Department of Homeland Security.
You know, I have a question for everybody in the chat. This is because I hear this argument being made by the Democrats, right? My question is this: how is ensuring everyone who votes in our elections, how is ensuring that they are actually United States citizens, how is that a threat to democracy? I'm really trying to understand why all of this misinformation and all this fear mongering is being put out, right? What is the threat of ensuring that every vote comes from an American citizen? I'm trying to get behind why is that a problem? You need an ID for everything. You need an ID to purchase cigarettes. You need an ID to get your I-9 done at a job. You need an ID to purchase alcohol. You need an ID. Like, I don't get what the threat to democracy is. All of this fear mongering is useless to me. Just pull out your ID. What is the problem? What are all of these different falsehoods that they're coming up with, that people are facing all these different challenges to be able to get a ID or a driver's license or a passport or Where are all of these different ramifications coming from that people are trying to come up with? Silo says they are trying to control the electric so they can keep a fascist government going. They are making up trouble and we're so used to it. Now we don't remember that they're just making it up. Well, here's the thing. Larson says it's not a threat to democracy. Voter ID is a threat to Democrat crime. Democrats have lost a large percentage of their voting base because of the insane policies. Dems need to cook the books for voters. Well, listen, Larson, I'm going to be honest with you. Anyone having a problem with showing any identification, I have questions. When all that's being asked of you is to prove who you are, what is the problem? They think minorities don't have IDs. Who is minorities? African Americans? Those other than Caucasian? If that is the idea and that is the truth, how do these people go to doctors? They ask you to show your ID, social security card, proof of insurance. Like what are we talking about? Jennifer says that you already need an ID, so why are Republicans making this sound like non-citizens are voting? Well, Jennifer, here's the problem. Jennifer. I'll be honest with you. All of these different meetings and hearings that they're having with all of these leaders and all of these people who have been in charge of these polls, they're coming forward and they're saying, yeah, there was hundreds of thousands of ballots that was counted that should not have been counted. Boxes and crates were rolled in. And listen, I'll just be honest with you, right? I have no problem with mail-in ballot. Here's the thing about mail-in ballot, though. I understand not everybody will be able to make it to the polls. But when you have hundreds of thousands, if not millions of mail-in ballots that just for some reason where was all of these citizens? Where did all of these people go? What happened to the hundreds of thousands of mail-in voters? Pay attention to the number of ballots that was cast when Joe Biden ran and when Trump ran for the second time. Where did all of those votes go? Those same votes should have went to Kamala. Right? Let me ask the question. How did Biden get 20 million more votes than Obama, Hillary, and that's my point, Larson. And I don't think that's an unfair question to ask. I think that is a very fair question to ask. Where did 20 million votes come from? Jennifer said even Republican appointees said that wasn't true. Hey, I can even accept that. Where did 20 million votes go? Where did they come from? Hey, Bad Duck, good morning. Anybody other than white male is a minority in the minds of white males. Okay, cool. I'll take that, Silo. So my thing is, where are all the people, all the minorities that's claiming they're having a problem with getting ID? I'm black myself. I've never had a problem getting ID. All the black people I know never had a problem getting ID. Right? Everybody I know in America that I've come across has never had a problem with going down to Secretary of State or State Department, DMV, whatever it is. They never had a problem getting an ID, showing ID. Who in this country is having a problem with getting an ID? That's my question. Who in this country and why? What is causing them to have problems? What problems are they facing with getting identification? And how are these grown adults buying cigarettes and purchasing alcohol if they don't have ID? How are they filling out job applications without ID? How are they completing I-9s without ID? How are they going to the hospital, emergency room without ID? I'm just trying to understand. Someone please tell me about all of these. You said in the black community, people have no problem getting IDs. Where is this coming from? I'm of the black community. I was born and raised in Detroit, Michigan, in the heart of Detroit, Michigan. No one ever had a problem with getting an ID. So where is all of this misinformation coming from with people having problems getting IDs? Who told people this? Where's the news stories? Where are the people? Where are the protests and the rallies? Shouldn't there be hundreds of thousands of people out there on the city streets saying, hey, we have a problem with the system because the system is making it hard for us to get IDs? Suppression is not usually about ID. That is oversimplification of the strategies to suppress black vote. Jennifer, I hear what you're saying. My question still remains on the table. Where are the people? Who are the people who's having a problem with getting IDs? And I can tell you right now, the black vote is not being suppressed. It's not being suppressed at all. Jasmine Crockett got what? I think it was 78 to 80% of the black vote in Texas, and it still didn't work out for her. Larson says, so people can get IDs to buy alcohol, tobacco, cell phones, etc., but lack the ability to get ID to vote? Exactly. Exactly, Bad Duck. This isn't 1950. No one is suppressing the black vote. In the 50s, they suppressed the black vote if they were voting outside of Democrat. Now it's 2026. You can vote for whoever. Who is suppressing whose vote? I think it's high time that we really do have a legit conversation so we can really get down to the marrow of the bone and figure out how and who is having problems with getting ID. I think that's important. Becca says, deliberately obtuse, read the bill, retire folks, women, people who don't drive, rural inhabitants, current legal name not matching birth certificates, etc. Okay, well, I'm dealing with it as it comes my way, Becca. So let's deal with it like you just gave it. Retire folks. Retired folks have a problem with getting ID? How? Women have a problem with getting identification? How? People who don't drive, a driver's license and an identification card is two different things. Rural inhabitants, they can get IDs too. Current legal name not matching birth certificate. If your current legal name does not match your birth certificate, go get the correct paperwork so that you can get your legal name to match up with your birth certificate. There you go. What's the problem? Exactly, Larson. How can you be retired without an ID? What the hell? Lou says, yes, their married name. Okay. I know plenty of divorced women who, after their marriage was over, they either got their name back, they got their maiden name back, and they just had to file a few pieces of paperwork to get the ID changed over. What's the problem? It's crazy how a handful of Democrats are trying to speak for millions of Americans that actually don't see the issue. It's crazy, isn't it, Brandon? Randomly says paperwork includes getting a judge to allow you to change your name back to your maiden name. For one, you are deliberately being obtuse. Stop being so stupid. I'm sorry. So let me make sure I got this correctly. If there's a divorce, in that divorce decree, you literally have the option to get your maiden name back. You say it's the cost and delay and time frame. Okay, so why would you wait until not wait? So here's my question now, randomly. Why would you wait until it's time to vote to just now get your business together? So how long after a divorce do you have to wait to get your last name back? I can tell you right now, I was divorced and my ex-wife got her last name back immediately. What was the problem? And there wasn't no cost nor delay. My ex-wife got her last name back the day we got our divorce certificate. Did she have to file a few pieces of paperwork, go down to Social Security and all this, that, and the other? What's the problem? Active married women and widows? Huh? So all right, so let me make sure I got this right. So if you're a married woman, let's say that you was born with the last name Jones, and now that you're married, your marriage last name is now let's go with Johnson. So if you go down to the Secretary of State and you just show them your marriage certificate, what's the problem? Widow, no. Divorce costs money, the time and travel, and why should she have to? Men don't. That is different and against the Constitution. Oh, so Becca, so now this is a patriarchal thing. Okay, got it. So let's deal with this, Becca. I hope y'all appreciate the fact that I'm actually reading the chat and I'm responding to y'all, right? So you said, widow, no. Divorce costs money. Not all divorce costs money. And the divorce that do cost money, okay, it just costs money. That's part of divorce. Not every divorce is the same, right? Sometimes you get an annulment. But why the time and travel, you take time out your day every day to do things. You travel every day to do things. Why should she have to? That's part of life. Men don't. That is different and against the Constitution. Men change their last names to their wife's last names as well. You have men who have gone through divorce that had to change their last name back. It's a cost. It's a travel. It's simple. Larson says, why is it society's problem that some people are so incompetent that they can't get an ID vote? It's not society's problem. It's a them problem. I think people are weighing the fact that getting an ID is not as hard as you think it is versus following a party that's telling you it's extremely hard to get an ID. It's not hard. Bad Duck says divorce costs $200 if you do it yourself. Rob says, I bet no one had a problem getting an ID to get welfare. Absolutely. Brandon says, I got a dissolution of marriage. It cost $100. A birth certificate, marriage license, and divorce papers. Hey, Pam Gar, how you doing this morning, Pam? So a birth certificate, marriage license, divorce papers. All of these are identifying documents. So what's the problem with getting an ID? Okay, all the women who got turned away to vote because of their ID, please step forward. Please step forward. All these women and if this is about women's suffrage from going through hardship and getting identification, I would have to tell you that that's not true. Women don't suffer with getting IDs. It's easy to get an ID. It's easy to go through these steps to be. If the next election, right, is 2028, it's 2026. You have 2 years to get your shit together. What's the problem? I'm really trying to understand this aspect. People are stuck in a cycle of making excuses and playing victim for having to go into society and be responsible. That's what it sounds like to me, Brandon. But I'm not trying to put that label on anyone other than the fact of it's 2026. You have 2 years to get your affairs in order so that you can participate in a vote. I'm trying to understand where people are coming up with this ideal that the SAVE Act will destroy democracy. Well, first, let me ask this question. Is democracy a good thing? Larson says, let's get some finger scanners and eyeball scanners and make it easy. You have no privacy in voting other than not disclosing who you voted for. I'm trying to understand what's the problem. It's not that hard. And that's the whole thing, Larson. If democracy is not a good thing, why is it worth saving? Good morning, brother. The SAVE Act will only restrict illegal voting. Oh, is that what the SAVE Act will do? If the SAVE Act will only restrict illegal voting, then let's boil that down and let's reduce it and get to the marrow of the bone. If the if the SAVE Act will only restrict illegal voting, then why do Democrats have a problem with the SAVE Act? Oh, I get it now. Do you see what the problem is? They're trying to make it about women. They're trying to make it about hardship. It seems to me like the only people who would have a problem with getting an ID would be illegal immigrants. Put a 1 in the chat if y'all understand what I'm saying. If I'm saying something that's incorrect, please, by all means, let me know. But that's what it seems like to me. It seems like this SAVE Act is really ruffling people's feathers because it's making it harder for illegal aliens to participate in what it is that the Democrats want them to be able to allow to be participated in. Keep saying ID and ignore the type of ID. Ignore being mistakenly, keep saying ID and ignore the type of ID. Ignore being mistakenly bumped from being a registered without notice. Ignore the actual bill. We already are required to have an ID to register. So what's the problem? Bradley said it's incorrect. Okay, cool. So what am I incorrect about? Please tell me what I'm incorrect about. What have I said so far that has been incorrect? Right? Only illegals don't have birth certificates in the United States of America. It's crazy, isn't it? Bad Duck says, wait, the Democrats are trying to circumvent the Constitution as usual? I know, right? It's almost like they're like, where the money reside.
Where the money reside, where the money reside, where the money reside, where the money reside.
Okay, thank you, Bradley, for responding to my question. You said who it disproportionately affects. Okay. Who does the SAVE Act disproportionately affect? That's my question to you. Because now that we have people who's actually willing to participate in the conversation, maybe we can get some better understanding. My question to you, Bradley, is who does the SAVE Act disproportionately affect? Let's talk about it. Let's get an understanding. Because the only ones that will be affected by this are those who truly have no way to prove they belong in this country. People who lack passports. Is passports the only identifying document or people or wait, with a birth certificate? You don't need not every American has a passport. That's not a disproportionate. That's not a disproportionate. Huh? So the SAVE Act affects people who don't have passports? Is that what you're saying, Bradley? What does a passport? Bradley, please elaborate. Please elaborate. How you have plenty of Americans. You have plenty of Americans who don't have passports. How does the SAVE Act affect them? You have Americans who have been Americans all their lives, who have birth certificates, social security card, ID. Who are these people? People who lack passports? A passport is not a required form of identification. You could just get basic ID. Exactly, Andrew. States do not have a standardized state ID that is acceptable by the SAVE Act. Okay, so let's go with that. States don't have a standardized state ID that is acceptable by the SAVE Act. Birth certificate or passport only are acceptable IDs. Okay, so if you don't have a passport, you're not disproportionately affected. But if you do have a birth certificate, you're positively affected because now you meet the requirements to fall under the confines of the SAVE Act and you're safe. So, is this really about passports? Or is this about people who lack birth certificates? Now that we're getting to the meat and the bones of it. Jason says SAVE Act is Republican attempt to discourage voters. How? How are you discouraging voters who are American citizens who have IDs for everything that there's needed above certain age limits? You need an ID to get into certain clubs. You need an ID to buy alcohol. You need an ID to buy tobacco. You need an ID to go into the hospital. You need an ID to fill out a job application so they can run your I-9 background. Okay, so Bradley says birth certificate doesn't have a photo and is not accepted unless the non-standardized ID matches perfectly. So what's the problem? What's the problem? Larson says, so the real ID driver's license is standardized, required to fly, and can get you into Canada by filing the passport, filling the passport requirements. Okay, you know what? I know an easier way to do this. Hold on. I know an easier way to do this. That way I don't have to wait on the chats, right? I know an easier way to do this. Inconsistencies with poll workers. Okay, cool. So, Brandon, do you see this number right here in the chat? Brandon, if you could, please call in. Brandon, if you could, please call in. Let's discuss it. Because I need to, it's hard for me to gain an understanding by way of chat. I think we can have a better conversation one-to-one on the phone, right? So call in, Brandon. Call this number right here, 313-782-3579. That way we can have a discussion. I'm at work, my friend. I can't make a phone call. Okay, I understand. I appreciate it. So from everything that you're saying to me, it doesn't sound like these are hard things to overcome to be able to vote by 2028 or even in the midterms, right? It sounds like that people who are not citizens of this country, who are not residents of this country, it sounds like they would not have a problem at all. Because if I was born with the last name, depends on the issuing state. So what? Give me an issuing state that this will be a problem in. Let's start there. Give me an issuing state that this will be a problem in. Well, just give me one. Alabama has a backlog of issuing corrections on birth certificates at about 8 months. Okay. So let's talk about Alabama. So Alabama has a backlog of issuing corrections on birth certificates. Okay. So let's say right now it is April of 2026. If you fill out your paperwork now, by next year, let's just give or take, by next year, you should get a correction on your birth certificate, right? So, in that sense, if I had an inconsistency with my identification in Alabama, if I submit paperwork stating that I have contacted and I have reached out, get it expedited, whatever I can possibly do to get this passed through so that I can be able to vote in the midterms. Hold on. Well, Bradley, before we go that far, we have to deal with what's on the table. Right? So, if Alabama has a backlog of issuing corrections on birth certificates at about 8 months, then by next year, you should be straight where you can vote in the presidential election come 2028. What's the problem? And if it's the midterms that you're concerned about, then I understand. I get that. I'm not going to take that away from you. I concede to that. But what correction would need to be made on the birth certificate? So if I was born as a Williams, what's the problem? Ascending says, I have been blocked from my voting location because of the complaints that doesn't stop in the corruption or the fact that it's happening. You're still proposing that people are aware that there is an inconsistency. Well, so Bradley, if I'm presupposing that people are aware that there's an inconsistency, here's my problem with this, right? If you had a concern about having all of your information in order, shouldn't you know this? If I knew that there was a problem with my birth certificate, why would I wait until the last minute to get it corrected? Because now we're talking about personal responsibility, right? When it comes to personal responsibility, it's your responsibility to make sure that your paperwork and your documents match up and your affairs are in order. Would you agree to that? Brain, what's going on? Good morning. Brain says, that is insane. Make an hour to go down to the DMV, fill out your name, your address, your social security number, pay the $50, get a picture snap. There, you got to renew a driver's license or a brand new ID card. That's what I'm trying to understand. But yeah, I think we really need to have this discussion because I think a lot of people are being driven by false narratives. All of these issues that keep on arising about the hardship of getting identification. There's always an answer to it. And typically what's happening is people are just not following the steps or taking the steps that's needed to be able to get their proper identification. But still, when it boils down to it, these regurgitating cycling heads, not all states offer a real ID the last time they renew. That still does not tackle the issue of why people can't get an ID. There are always inconsistencies between people. The complaint people should not suffer from the complaint, the compliant people should not suffer from the incompliant people or non-compliant people. So where are these issues? I don't know, y'all. It seems to me people it seems to me, and Bradley, by the way, I want to tell you I appreciate you for engaging back and forth. I appreciate you for commenting, right? But I think people just need, if people want to be compliant, they need to be adamant. And it shouldn't even have to come from something like this for people to have their documents and their paperwork in order. You're adding hurdles for people who are already overworked and underpaid. It's a solution to a problem that doesn't exist. How expensive is it to get an ID? That's not adding hurdles for people who's overworked and underpaid. That's not adding hurdles. Getting an ID is not a hurdle. First of all, how are you working without an ID? That's the first hurdle should be getting an ID. How did you get a job without an ID? How are you getting a W-2 or 1099 contracted job, gig worker job? How did you get an ID how did you get a job without an ID? Updating your info with the government isn't adding a hurdle. That's just life. All you have to do is go to the DMV, pay $15 to get your ID. What's the hurdle? Democrat talking points always focusing on the sliver group and ignoring the rest. The ID you need to work and the one suggested in the SAVE Act are not the same. Okay, so let's read the SAVE Act. SAVE Act ID. Let's read it. Do 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 do. Do 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 do. All right. This bill requires individuals to provide documentary proof of United States citizenship when registering to vote in federal elections. Specifically, the bill prohibits states from accepting and processing an application to register to vote in the federal election unless the applicant presents the documentary proof of United States citizenship. The bill specifies what documents are considered acceptable proof of U.S. citizenship, such as identification that complies with the Real ID Act of 2005 that indicates United States citizenship. If this has been an issue since 2005, it's 2026. Further, the bill prohibits states from registering an individual to vote in a federal election unless at the time the individual applies to register to vote, the individual provides documentary proof of United States citizenship, and 2, requires states to establish an alternative process under which an applicant may submit other evidence to demonstrate United States citizenship. Identification is mandatory to participate in society. Nearly all aspects of life require identification. Right. Each state must take affirmative steps on an ongoing basis to ensure that only United States citizens are registered to vote, which shall include establishing a program to identify individuals who are not United States citizens using information supplied by certain sources. Additionally, states must remove non-citizens from their official list of eligible voters. The bill allows for a private right of action against an election official who registers an applicant to vote in the federal election who fails to present documentary proof of United States citizenship. The bill establishes criminal penalties for certain offenses, including registering an applicant to vote in the federal election who fails to present documentary proof of United States citizenship. So let's look up what documents are considered acceptable proof of United States citizenship for SAVE Act. What documents? Let's look it up. All right. So, according to the proposed legislation, the following documents are considered acceptable proof of United States citizenship. So, does everybody have a passport? I'm gonna ask y'all in the chat. I'm gonna give 10 seconds in between each question. Does everyone have a passport? Yes or no? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. All right. If you are born in the United States of America, do you have a birth certificate? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. Can that be accompanied by a photo ID? Okay, so the birth certificate showing U.S. birth accompanied by a state ID. Okay, so citizenship naturalization certificate, official documentation issued by the Department of Homeland Security. So if you are a legal immigrant in the United States of America, would you have this documentation issued by the Department of Homeland Security? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. Okay. A consular report, a report of birth of a U.S. citizen issued by the State Department. Sounds like a birth certificate. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. Okay. Badass says you definitely should. Okay. Military Indian records, military IDs with the U.S. place of birth or a KIC American Indian card. If you are of the United States military, you have a military ID. I don't care what branch of service you go into, be it Air Force, Marines, Coast Guard, Navy, or Army, or, the all legendary Space Force. You will have a military ID, enhanced driver's license, an EDL specifically indicating United States citizenship. So what is the problem? Based on these, if you are born as an American citizen, you have no problem. So now the question is, if all the avenues are there for you to get an ID, why do you not have an ID? Is it the government's fault or is it your fault? That's my last question to y'all in the chat. If all of these avenues are available for you to be compliant with the SAVE Act and you cannot get an ID, is it your fault or is it the government's fault? Lou says it's the government. How is it the government's fault? Ascending says it's impossible to live in the modern world without ID. Exactly. So whose fault is it that you don't have an ID if all of these different avenues are available to you to be compliant with the SAVE Act? It sounds like your fault. Bradley says, not a question of fault, a question of unnecessary hurdles which impede the exercising of a right guaranteed in the Constitution. And which right would that be? Which right within the Constitution would that be, Bradley? Ascending says, if someone claims they can't get one, there are criminals here legally or they're lying about it. Facts. So which right is it? Which impede the exercising of a right guaranteed in the United States Constitution. So which right is that? Exactly, badass. We have a right to fair and free elections, just like you have the right to vote. The 15th. Okay. So 15th Amendment, right? I can only assume that you're talking about the 15th Amendment. If you're talking about the 15th Amendment, please put a yes in the chat, Bradley. What? Is this what you're talking about? The 15th Amendment, Bradley? Ratified on February 3rd, 1870, the 15th Amendment to the United States Constitution prohibits federal and state government. And yes, okay, so this is the, all right, so let's read. Let's read together. Hopefully y'all can see this, right? Put a 1 in the chat if you can see this. All right, ratified on February 3rd, 1870, the 15th Amendment to the United States Constitution prohibits federal and state governments from denying a citizen the right to vote based on race, color, or previous condition of servitude. What? It aimed to secure voting rights for African American men during Reconstruction, but was often undermined by discriminatory state laws until the Voting Rights Act of 1965. Huh? Based on race, color, or previous condition of servitude. What does this have to do with getting an ID? Lou says, told you the government. What the hell does this have to do with getting an ID in 2026? Right, badass. I don't see anything in there about legal status. This says race, color, or previous condition of servitude. It says nothing about citizenship. This has nothing to do with the 15th Amendment. And Bradley, I hope you understand. I'm not attacking you. I'm boiling it down to the bone. I'm addressing what you're bringing. SCOTUS has interpreted as right to vote. If it's a right, it cannot be denied. Prohibits federal and state governments from denying a citizen a right to vote. Everyone has a right to vote. Can we all agree on that? When I say everyone has a right to vote, please put a 1 in the chat if we can all agree on that. Okay? Put a 1 in the chat if we can all agree on that, because I have a follow-up, which Bradley, I don't know if you would agree on this or not, but let's just go here for a second. Everyone should have the right to vote. All right. All right. Should everyone have the right to own a firearm, including felons? And he hate me. Look at he hate me. Look at Larson. So, if everyone should have the right to vote, everyone should have the right to a firearm, including felons, right? Are they less than human beings? Are they less than citizens? I am just saying. Every legal citizen has a right to vote. Larson says, are felons excluded from the Bill of Rights? Convicted felons in the United States often lose specific civil and constitutional rights, including voting, firearm ownership, jury service, and public housing eligibility. While the Sixth Amendment guarantees fair trial rights, convictions allow for limitations on freedom. Rights restoration varies significantly by state, often requiring pardons or completions of parole. The second requires it requires it too. In a well-regulated militia, I support the original text. Bradley, I'm with you on supporting the original text, but nowhere within the 15th Amendment does it says anything about citizenship. It says based on race, color, and condition of servitude. If we're going to go by the old text, we have to stick with the old text. And in 2026, there's no one being turned away from the voting poll based on their race or their color. Citizenship is the only problem that we are having. And I'm going to tell you why citizenship is the only problem that we're having. Because where did 20 million votes come from? Where did 20 million votes come from? Bad Duck said the 15th is specifically added for blacks and slaves. That's all it was added for. So there's still black slaves in America in 2026? Biden got more votes than Obama. I'll never buy that. I don't like Obama, but he was popular as hell. Bruh, Lou says yes. Okay, Lou, where are the black slaves? Where are the black plantations in 2026? Bradley, you're proving my point. You says 20 million votes were a result of lowered threshold and burden to vote because of mail-in voting. Okay, now let's tackle that for a second, Bradley. We're not under COVID anymore. And since we're not under COVID anymore, and we want to ensure that every vote that gets counted comes from a United States citizen, shouldn't that threshold be lifted? And when I say lifted, not mean lowered anymore, I'm talking about brought up. Shouldn't the standard to vote in an American election, shouldn't the standard be that you should be a United States citizen? You said South Carolina, there's still plantations with black slaves in South Carolina? South Carolina, black slave plantations in 2026. No, the U.S. should make it as easy to vote as possible to more accurately reflect the will of the people. But if the will of the people are now, Bradley, I'm so glad that you put that. If the will of the people are not all United States citizens, how do we know what will that is? Bradley, in a 100% total, if 60%, let's just say, give or take, like hypothetically speaking, if 60% of that vote is not American driven or American citizens, what is going to happen to this country, Bradley? Exactly, Ron. Citizens have a right to vote. So prove you're a citizen. It's just that simple. Because, Bradley, I want to make sure that we're sticking to what it is that we're talking about. You said that this was about passports. Now you're talking about citizenship. The only reason that you will be talking about citizenship is because as a United States citizen, you have a birth certificate the moment that you fall out your mother's vagina. You have a social security card. You have a number. So all of these different pathways that you're coming up with, this sounds like arguments being made for people who are non-U.S. citizens. Why should non-U.S. citizens, why should illegal aliens, why should people who are not of this country, born of this country, why should people who are not citizens of this country have a say in our country's elections? They're not citizens. But in 2026, South Carolina continues to preserve and interpret Black slave plantation history, with key states focusing on the lives of the enslaved rather than just plantation owners. Major states near Charleston, including Boone Hall and Middleton Place, offer guided tours, original slave dwellings, and Black history. No. I don't want to know about museums and exhibits and tours. Where are there slaves in chains right now who are still serving up under chattel slavery in 2026? There is no more chattel slavery in 2026. Ty says, when a state's no law shall be made against. Second says, shall not be infringed more than there are no such restrictions in the rights to vote, meaning the intended restrictions could be made. Yes. The restrictions that should be made is you have to have a ID proving you're a United States citizen to vote. Bradley says, my issue is that people make mistakes all the time when issuing birth certificates, misspellings, and incorrect date recordings. Many of these people are unaware of the issues and will be denied. Bradley, thank you for bringing that up. If my child is born with a misspelling on their birth certificate, it is my responsibility as the parent to get that corrected. My child is not going to vote until they're above a certain age. So that is the parent's fault, not the government's fault. I will concede with you that if there is a misspelling on your birth certificate at birth, then that is the government's fault and your parents' fault. If you did not get that corrected by the time you turn 18, I have to look at you differently and say, hey, yo, why you wait so long to get this corrected? How are you applying for a job? How are you applying for benefits? How are you applying for things that require showing of your birth certificate if there's a misspelling on your birth certificate? You should have had that fixed by now. So by the time you're at the age to vote, you will be straight. Place the blame where you like. People will fall through the cracks. I'm not placing the blame. I'm talking about responsibility. As a parent, it is your responsibility to ensure your children's name is spelled correctly on the birth certificate. At a certain age, 18, 21, depending on, community, culture, ideology, state, whatever. It is your responsibility to ensure that all of your documentation is in order so that you can participate in what it is that you're trying to do. Cindy says, Bradley, why do you keep moving the goalposts? I wouldn't say that Bradley's moving the goalposts. It's more so just not accepting what is that's being said. And I have no problem with him not accepting it, but I'm giving all of the clarifying answers as to how this can be resolved prior to 2028 or before any other federal election. Is that the onus is on the person to ensure their information is in line and in order so that they can vote in a federal election. Larson says, so 95% can have their vote screwed because feel for the 5%. That is self-deletion empathy projected on society. Absolutely. Brain says, well, if we're counting all the votes out there in the World War II and World War I memorial cemetery, then Biden is number one. Like that Scooby-Doo movie on Zombie Island. Just for one full moon it was. And we wouldn't have got away with it if it wasn't for those meddling kids and that trifling dog. It's not hard to get an ID, man. We have to stop as adults. We have to stop as a society, as a country. We have to stop with the self-proclaimed victimhood of it's impossible to get an ID. It's not impossible. It's not even hard. It doesn't take anything. Anyway, y'all, I've been up here for 3 hours. It's time for me to log in to work. So I will holla at y'all later. Y'all have a good day. And again, make sure you're subscribed. Come by on Saturdays at 3 p.m. Central Standard Time for Weekend at Willie's. I will holla at y'all later. You said I'm not arguing for me. I'm arguing for the rights of all citizens. Bradley, when you say for the rights of all citizens, if you are born in America, you have a birth certificate. You are a United States citizen. If there's a misspelling on your birth certificate, get it corrected. You have a social security number, which means you can get a social security card, which means you should have a social security card. If you have ID to purchase cigarettes, alcohol, go to a pharmacy, go to a club, you have everything that you need to be a United States citizen. And I get you're not arguing for you, but if you're saying you're arguing for the rights of all citizens, as an American citizen, you have rights. It sounds like the only thing that this SAVE Act goes against is people who do not have rights as American citizens, which will be non-U.S. citizens and illegal aliens. And if we're fighting, now let me make sure I say this before we leave up out of here too. If we're fighting for the rights of non-U.S. citizens and illegal aliens, trust me when I say this, you will lose every time. Because this is America. We have to do what's needed to protect our country, to protect our elections, to protect our citizens, to protect our infrastructure, to protect our country. That is what must be done. And as uncomfortable as it may be for people, not talking about you, Bradley, as uncomfortable as it may be for people to accept that this is America, we have to do what's best for us first. And if what's best for us first is ensuring that only United States citizens is voting in our elections, then guess what? We're going to ensure that only United States citizens is voting in our elections. So we won't have 20 million mysterious votes pop up out of nowhere. But as always, y'all, I'm about to log into work. So I will holler at y'all again. Make sure y'all subscribe. Make sure y'all come by for the Weekend at Willie's, Saturday at 3 p.m. Central Standard Time. I will holler at y'all later. Deuces.
Leave that dope alone.
You haven't. So
He need to leave that dope alone. Leave that dope alone. Leave that dope alone. Leave that dope alone. Leave that dope alone.
Sway.
Leave that dope alone. Leave that dope alone. Sway. He need to leave that dope alone. 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 Leave that dope alone.